I'm Ben Poole for Finextra here at the World Retail Congress 2014 in Paris. I'm joined now by Sarah Quinlan, who is Senior Vice President of Market Insights for MasterCard Advisors. Thank you for being here, Sarah.
Thank you very much for having me.
Can you give us an overview of the key global retail trends seen in your latest Spending Pulse review?
Well, it is fascinating. You know, Spending Pulse looks at all forms of tender, including cash and check. So it's really a great picture of the total retail economy in each of the countries that we issue the report. So if we start with the US, the largest economy, it is really doing extremely well. But it's very different spending than before. So it's very much focused on experiences. So for example, the number one category in August was actually lodging. Why? We were taking vacations, and we'd seen that 2 months earlier with airlines being up before. So of course, if lodging's up, restaurants are up because we're of course dining out as well. So it was all about experiential spending, and there was actually very little back to school spending, only in electronics. So we weren't buying any clothes. We'll wait till the seasons actually change for that. The second economy that's doing very well is the UK economy. And what was great is we could see that they also had consistent experiential spending. Now they, unlike the US, actually love department stores. So we saw a real strength there in the department store spending for the month of August. And again, though, experiential, so again, finishing up the summer vacations as everyone was trying to get that last little bit in before the weather shifts. So all very strong. Unfortunately, in the rest of the world, when I take my sort of look around the globe, we really see spending slowing significantly. So if I think about Brazil, we see hyper food inflation down there. So a quite large jump in the food basket, but not in the number of transactions. So we know that that's inflation. But we see a huge drop in apparel spending and any other discretionary spending, which really is saying that, you know, the wallet's flat. If I have to spend an outsized amount of money over here, then I can't spend it here. And so that's the challenge that we're seeing facing people on an ongoing basis. So that's quite difficult down in Brazil, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, especially with an election coming up in November. And then finally China, which we have been seeing slowing since last August, in fact. Actually, it had been negative the last 3 months. It was finally slightly positive in total retail spending, but that was only because there was 2 holidays during the month. So we're only seeing a lift when there's actually holiday spending. But the key which we noticed there, and you know, we know the provenance of where somebody's coming from, is this is the mainland Chinese consumer not spending anymore. So the domestic spending of the person living in Hong Kong is enough to sort of drive grocery and health and beauty and those sort of categories, but it's not enough to drive the most important things like jewelry and furniture. So we see that slowdown in real estate out there, and then we see that luxury spending, which really is a change in policy in China as they're trying to sort of take out some of the gifting policy that's been going on, and as they're, you know, clamping down on corruption and the like. So that's the interesting thing. So that's a spin around the world. So not very optimistic outside of the two drivers of the economy, meaning the US and the UK.
And is there any data that retailers might find surprising?
Well, I think the most surprising thing to me is something that many people think of course, as discretionary. Now, I know that it's mandatory and needed in my life, and that, of course, is jewelry spending. So what's happened is we're seeing people investing in jewelry because they're accessorizing themselves, and it feels permanent. It's something I can leave to my daughter, who can then, you know, enjoy it for another generation. So it has personal value to people, but we're seeing the average price point over $2,500. So this is not costume jewelry that people are buying. This is actual real investment in spending. So that's interesting, and that's a trend that we've seen for 17 months in a row. So it's real strength, and we saw really understanding that that's, again, was when I felt there was confidence coming back into the economy. That's the number one trend. The second is clearly the value for money approach. So what's interesting is we see people actually move up the food chain in the sense of spending on a more expensive good, all right, a little bit less often, even though a lot of people are worried about incomes and lower incomes around the world. But in fact, what's happened is that people are saying, if I'm going to spend my hard-earned money, I'm actually going to really get something that I value. So we actually see them go up and spend at a higher price point. We see this, for example, in people moving up to fast casual for restaurants versus going to quick serve restaurants, which is what everybody thought would happen as the economy went into the deep recession. So it's really interesting. So those are the two aha moments. But the other final thing that I think is extremely important is that we're extremely brand loyal. So this movement to understanding that we, before the recession, would sort of have one of everything, now we're very focused on just one or two brands. So it's incumbent upon the retailer to really work harder and get that loyalty of the consumer, because that's exactly how they're spending.
How fast is digital commerce eating into high street spending?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's getting there, but it's not as much as everybody thinks. So e-commerce is about 5.7% of total retail spending in the United States. It's a little bit less in the UK. And those are the most advanced in terms of percentage of total retail spending. So it's interesting. So you can see that the bricks and mortar of the high street is still very appealing. That sense of wanting that social part of spending is a big part of how we rule our lives with respect to our consumer spending. So from that perspective, it is growing in importance, and it is critical, because what digital commerce does, and that omnichannel, as they use, it may be a buzzword, but I think it's very appropriate, is it's how the consumer gets content. This is how they can actually do some initial search and some initial understanding of what their options are. They may choose not to buy it online and choose to buy it in the store. They may buy it online and return it in the store. But remember, the consumer is in charge. So the most critical thing here is to give them that option. All right, and with that option, then they actually will execute, and you'll bring the loyalty of that consumer closer to you. But fascinatingly, when you really look at this, it's still not as big, but in certain sectors it's huge. So in something like a commodity, which would be, of course, be electronics, we actually see almost 50% of that spending done online. So it is absolutely critical for someone who is a retailer in that space to have that online presence to capture their share of that wallet. However, in other categories, it's not so important. Only 11% of apparel is actually sold online in the UK. So, there's certain categories where we really aren't early adopters there yet. So it's going to take a while. It is really critical, though, to actually build that presence now, and again, reinforce that loyalty with that consumer going forward, and know that you've given them options.
Sarah Quinlan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.